The Truth Girls.
Hi everyone. All right, I'm just gonna tell you, I really wanted to make a video today, and I had told you in the past that I am a Christian, and that I would share my testimony with you at some point. Like I promised you, and I will. The problem is it's a very long story, and I sit down and I'm like, oh, this is gonna be like an hour-long video. I'm not sure where to start, so I thought I'm gonna like just do. Maybe I'll do some of it in chunks. And God put it on my heart today to talk to you about my experience with addiction, which, like, I have never mentioned this on YouTube. It's not something I usually talk about, that I've had any experience with this, but I really feel that I want to talk about it because it's something that I have overcome, that I don't deal with. I am free of this. Like, God has freed me, and I'm really grateful for that. Like, I'm super nervous talking about this. It's something that I used to talk about it a lot. And I was so happy that I had been freed from like these shackles and that I had been healed. I was so happy about it that I was like, testify, testify. And then what I found happened was that actually people judged me for it. Eventually I got the feeling like, maybe you shouldn't tell people about this because I was in church for a long time and I just felt always excluded. I was always sidelined. I was like, I can play piano like you wouldn't believe. I have actually like a talent for sight reading. I'm like the human sight reading machine. So I would go to church and I'd be like, please let me be on the worship team. I can play anything. And I was always kind of sidelined. So I started getting the impression like, well, maybe you shouldn't talk about your history because people are just gonna see that in you. They're gonna look at you and they'll be like, oh, she used to be a drug user. So you tell them that with the intention of saying like, hey, I'm a walking miracle. I shouldn't even be alive. And why does this make me emotional? I don't know. So they look at you and they miss that and they just see drug user. And maybe they think, oh, maybe she still does it, which I don't. So I kind of stifled myself and I stopped talking about it. So anyway, I stopped talking about it. But I'm going to talk to you about it because I'm hoping maybe it'll help somebody. Yes, I did do drugs at a time in my life. So first of all, like backtrack. As I've mentioned before, I grew up with an autism spectrum disorder, what is known as Asperger's. And nobody knew at the time. It wasn't even in DSM, like when I was little. And nobody knew. They all just saw me and they said, she's really smart, but she acts like a crazy person. Like, what is wrong with her? Because, like I might have been smart intellectually, but I was really socially, emotionally quite delayed. And I was very hyper-focused on certain things to the point where, like, I could not get my focus on other stuff. Socially, I was awkward. I was different. I had unusual interests, which is a really big hallmark of kids with Asperger's having like really bizarre interests, like for a 9-year-old girl, for example, to be totally kind of obsessed with etymology. So I would like explain all this stuff. And I thought, hey, this is great. Like I can talk to people, but people thought it was weird. I also had some interest in leprosy and the plague. So I would give people facts about leprosy and the plague and talk about the Middle Ages and stuff like that. And like I would talk about all this stuff and drive people crazy and talk about the plague. And I thought I was just making conversation, but it didn't always go over so well. So just to say, like I had these unusual special interests. I also had like a propensity for getting overloaded sensory wise or whatever, and I would have meltdowns. And I knew I was different, and I didn't really know what I was supposed to do about it. Now, I would say that if you have a child with Asperger's, help them to learn that to focus on their strengths and not to focus on trying to be like everyone else. Like my mother would say to me, when are you going to be like everyone else? When are you going to be a regular girl? When she would say that her wish for me when I grew up was that I would be functioning. Like she would actually say that. She would say, when will you be functional? When will you do this like other people? Like I guess as you see, as I'm talking about this, like this was a painful experience for me. I just knew that I was different. My attempts to try to be like other people didn't go over well. I had a good sense of humor. That's probably what saved me. And I was very pretty. That kind of helped too. But I could see that I was different. At some point, I started focusing really on beauty and looks and not fashion so much, but like makeup and things like that. But I did it in like a really aspy obsessive way. Like I would read women's magazines and I would rip out all the stuff and I would categorize them in folders and I would like write down lists, like I really like that, you know. And it became really kind of obsessive. And then that shifted to food and I was like that with calories. And all day I had like ticker tape in my head, numbers all day, and I was like writing down numbers and like rearranging numbers. And I mean, if I had a daughter who was doing that, I'd say like, this is not normal and maybe she has Asperger's, but at the time people didn't know. I got in a lot of trouble. Like I got kicked out of school when I was 4, I got kicked out of school when I was 14, I got kicked out of every summer camp, and it was always kind of like, you know, there's something wrong with your daughter, she doesn't act right, we don't know what it is, but she's really smart, like she could do anything academically, but you know, what the heck, right? And at home, my parents, you know, like they're great people and everything, but I mean, this was in the old days, so they were pretty strict and they did spank me. And the thing is, if you grow up with a developmental disorder, you know, it's not a discipline issue. So if you have parents who are very, very, very strict and it's like you're always in trouble, you just start feeling like I can't do anything right. Because, you know, as they correct one behavior, there'll be another one. So, you know, if I don't respond when you talk to me and you take it like it's insolence, and you punish me, and then a few minutes later you punish me because my processing is slow and I'm really slow setting the table, and you take that as an affront. You know, and then I'm not on the other task you want me to be because I'm back on etymology or whatever, and then I won't put on my shoes and my socks because I have some issues with my sensory, with my feet. Like it's one after the other. It's like all day. So if you're really hard about it and you're like, okay, this kid's going to behave, the kid could just come out feeling like I'm always in trouble, I'm always punished, I can't do anything right. And if on top of that you're like, when are you going to be normal? When are you going to be functional? So let's just say like my self-esteem was kind of not very good. And I was, you know, I didn't know what was wrong with me. And because of the eating disorder, when I was 16 and I graduated high school here, my parents decided to send me to like a kind of institution, a residential school, like not like a hospital, but like a special school. And actually this is the one that was in the news recently that Paul Babu worked at. And it was abusive and it was shut down by the state for child endangerment eventually. So I spent 3.5 years at this school. So you're probably wondering, like, what does this have to do with addiction? I'm going to tell you. Oh, this is going to be a long video. Okay, so when I was in high school, before I got sent away, I had a boyfriend who I liked very much. He was very cute, very nice, and he smoked weed. And he even, like, sold weed to his friends. So, you know, I smoked some weed the last year, like grade 11. I smoked weed with him for about 3 months. And I think it was just a way for me to try to, you know, do what everybody else was doing in my crowd and fit in. And they, you know, my friends called me Stonia, so like, wow, now I had a nickname. And then, but after about 3 months, I was like, you know, I don't want to do this. Like, I did a little experimenting. I said, you know, I don't want to do this. So I stopped, okay? But I still had this eating disorder, and so my parents sent me to this school. Now, before they sent me, they did testing, and they didn't know what was wrong with me. They're like, okay, she has like really volatile, you know, outbursts. They said my social perception was impaired. I had little insight, like impaired judgment, like I guess about social things, about myself. My interest bordered on the obsessive. Like there were some things like that that could, like, you know, flagged Asperger's, but at the time, it wasn't really like on their radar, you know, and I wasn't autistic, so they didn't, or not like classical autistic, so they didn't get that. And all the stuff like the eye contact and whatever, I guess they didn't mention it, whatever. They were like, we don't know what's wrong with her, but she pretty much has an eating disorder, so why don't you just like put her away somewhere. So they gave us these brochures for two schools, and one was for a school. I'm really glad I didn't go there. This place was even worse than where I went. They, like, if you ran away, they would like put you in leg shackles and a bunny suit, literally. Like, it was insane. The school I went to, I chose it because they showed horses in the brochure, but as it turned out, there were no actual horses when I got there. As many of us found out, there were no horses, but too late because we were there. So I was there, and I'm not going to go into like my whole experience being there, but when I was there, they would send us a therapist every week. And there was this one therapist called Jim, and he was a recovering addict. He said to me, I know what your problem is. You're an addict. And I said, well, why would you say that? Like, I didn't even really do drugs. You know, I don't have a drug problem. And he said, no, I know, but you have the isms, like the personality traits. And so I was actually really glad that he said that. I was really glad to finally know what was wrong with me, because I was like, oh, wow, finally I know what's wrong with me. I'm a drug addict. So it was like a relief for me, because I was like, oh, what's wrong with me? You know, I'm like, something's not right. I don't know what it is. Why am I not like other people? He was like, you're an addict. And I was like, yes, okay, thank you. And he said, you know, you have to go to these meetings, these AA meetings or NA meetings. And I was like, great. Now, you know, I have an identity. I can go to this club. I'm going to fit right in with everybody else. They're going to understand me. And so I went to a couple of those meetings. Turned out, like, I didn't really fit in, and it went all over my head. And I hadn't really had any experience doing drugs, so all that sending me there did was made me feel like, well, since I'm an addict, I better get on it and start doing some drugs, because, you know, I'm in these meetings and I don't have anything in common with these people. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but it's like, I haven't done any drugs, so, you know, I can't relate to what they're talking about. So, like, I better get out there and do some drugs. So I left, and I did do drugs. And when I first got out, when I was 19, it was like my mission was to do drugs, because I'm an addict, right? So I should do that. So I did do some drugs. I tried all different drugs. And then eventually, like, I got into like opiate type painkiller drugs. And then I developed a drug problem for real. And of note, the summer that I was 20 years old, I had an accident with this kind of thing, which I don't want to spell it out exactly, you guys can figure it out, where my boyfriend found me not breathing and called the paramedics. And, you know, they brought me back. And the thing is that when I was, like, out, I wasn't exactly dead, but I was really on the verge of it. I was like in this black void. And when I came out, I was like in the back of a tunnel. Like, I could see this tunnel, and I could see the people in the world, like, around me. And I was in the way back of this tunnel, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of a ravine, like literally teetering on the brink of death. And that at any moment I could let go and just fall into this chasm. And I didn't, you know, but I felt that. I felt like I could just let go and die. But I didn't. I came out of it. And when I came out, I really felt, even though I didn't believe in God or anything, I mean, you know, I was brought up really without religion, without spirituality, so I didn't really know much about it. I just felt like something was telling me, it's not your time to die. You have stuff to do here. You've got work to do, and you have something to do, you know, for the world and whatever. You have work to do. You're not going anywhere. And you know, I knew that I'd been given a second chance for a reason. So what happened after that was I was introduced to Christianity. I'm going to really cut that part short, because let's just say I had to heal from a lot of things, and it happened in layers and happened over the course of many years. But fast forward several years later, I had a couple of years there where I didn't use any substances, but then some really bad stuff happened at one point in my life, and I was just so heartbroken, and I just sort of went on a bender. And I used a lot of painkillers and all kinds of stuff. I mean, first I was on antidepressants and things, but I ended up finding that the painkillers killed my pain better than the antidepressants, because they didn't really work. And, you know, I had been introduced to Christianity, and I had received Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and I came to believe, right? But, you know, I was a very immature Christian. I didn't have a lot of support. So there were still, though, quite a few years where I was sort of floundering, and I didn't have, you know, like good, you know, community around me and support. And also, like I said before, I used to tell everybody, oh, I used to do drugs and now I don't, and I felt really excluded. And I think that exclusion might have had more to do with just my Asperger's in general, which at the time, stuff like my social skills was a lot worse, and my self-confidence, and I tried to hang out with the young people at church, but I felt very different, and I felt like I wasn't really included. I always felt like people treated me like I was kind of stupid, like there was something wrong with me, and they were kind of a bit like condescending, and like they would never give me any responsibility, and they would make excuses for it and stuff, and I just felt like I wasn't treated like everyone else, so I thought, oh, maybe it's because I keep telling them about my past, so I had trouble with being in church, and I kind of was in and out. Eventually, I think it was around 97 or 98, I was at my parents' place, and I was supposed to be in their country house, and a friend of my brother's, who was a Christian, was supposed to be taking care of my rabbit. But I came back early, and I ran into him, and I knew he was a Christian, and I told him, Mark, I'm a Christian. I mean, I gave my heart to God, but I'm really like stuck in this lifestyle and these problems, this dependency. And I really know that God is the only one who's going to save me and like pull me out of this, but I'm so ashamed. I'm too ashamed to even go to church. Like, I just can't even. And Mark said to me, God accepts you as you are. You don't come to God because you're perfect. You come to God because you're a sinner. So he said, that's fine. You don't go to church because, you're perfect and you're holy. You go to church to worship God, and God will bless you. You go to church to learn about God, to worship God, to study the Bible. God will bless you, but don't wait till you're perfect. It doesn't work that way. So true. So I said, okay. So I went to church, and I started doing Bible study, and my Bible teacher was really great. Like, she knew that I had problems with using drugs. She gave me some verses, okay? And the first thing was everything is possible for him who believes. It's Mark 9:23. If you can, said Jesus, everything is possible for one who believes. As in, what do you mean if you can? Of course you can, if you believe. And I hung on to that verse, like I just mantraed it, to use a Hindu expression or whatever. I just thought about that all day. I was like, everything is possible for him who believes. And I just reminded myself that even this was going to be possible. And the other verse was Philippians 4:13. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. I know how to live humbly, and I know how to abound. I'm accustomed to any and every situation, to being filled and being hungry, to having plenty and having need. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. The point being that whatever was going to come my way, I was going to get through it by faith, because God would give me the strength through Christ who strengthens me. And I just hung on to these verses. And at the time, I was taking a drug which makes you very jittery, and it's not meth. I never touched meth. I was taking something, and this Bible teacher let me play the piano, and I really appreciated that she let me be part of the worship. But my hands were all shaky because I was all wired up, that. And I really credit her for doing that, because it was like, yes, I was so far from perfect. I was really struggling, but she let me worship and praise God, even though I had a problem. And what ended up happening was that this problem was overcome, that I was abstinent like a day, then I used. Then I was abstinent 2 days, then I used. And every time it stretched out, I made it a whole month. And then I think I just got this idea, well, that's weird, I haven't used in the whole month, and I started thinking about it, and just letting that thought back in. I ended up going out and using, and then that was it. I was like, oh, never again. And I let that go. However, I was still like taking some prescriptions. Now that took longer to sort out, but the hold of addiction was broken. And the prescriptions, it wasn't like I was popping Vicodins or whatever. But like I talked in another video about like antidepressants and other things that are like more like things people use for like mental health and recovery and stuff like that, not drugs of abuse, okay? But, you know, the hold was broken. And what if there's one thing I can say about this was that, number one, people with Asperger's can, you know, like we have this reputation like the goody two-shoes, but, you know, there is the possibility of going into that direction for whatever reason, either to fit in or because you don't know what you're doing or because you have pain. So, you know, that's something that can happen. And I think the key to prevent that, for one, is to keep a high self-esteem and to have the person on the track of what they're good at, what they're interested in, instead of this pressure to be like other people. Just be who you are, you know, and encourage your kids to just be who they are and be the best they can be and not be like somebody else, or just not be, you know, normal. Because that's like an insane amount of pressure that we can't live up to. And, you know, as you get older, things get better, your social skills get better. I mean, most people now would not think that I had this problem. The other thing was that to overcome something like dependency, it's something that can be done by faith. It really means changing your whole life. And so faith will come in many times, as in, oh, well, you know, it's scary to get a job outside of where you're used to working, i.e. like a bar for me. But by faith, through prayer, you know, you can break those patterns and those habits. You're afraid to let go of your old friends. Well, who are going to be my friends? But you can, you know, through your faith. This is the test of faith, is in rebuilding your life. And the faith is what gets you through that. Whatever it is that comes, your worries about things, how you're going to get money, you know, who your friends are going to be, maybe your boyfriend or whatever. Those are things individually that you deal with. And this is where it comes in again, Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, or who gives me strength. It's not like a one-time deal. It's like an ongoing thing. You know, they say God never gives you more than you can handle. But I think if you're living without a relationship with God, you can have more than you can handle. I think when you're in a relationship with God, though, and you're in His care, you will be given strength to deal with whatever is coming your way. You know, it's different. And the other verse that she had given me at the very beginning, when she gave me a Bible, was Genesis 12:2. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Now, I realize that this was meant for Abraham, or whatever, you know, this was about Israel. But she said, you will be a blessing. She said, this is the promise of God for you, that you will be a blessing, as opposed to a burden, because I felt like I was a burden my whole life. And so my prayer to God always was, make me a blessing. Make me someone who can be a blessing to other people. There was one other thing I wanted to say about, so when I had that, I realized after, when I had that experience where I almost died, and I was like in this black hole, it was kind of a spiritual, you know, revelation for me, because I think that I didn't go to hell. Like, in God's mercy, I would not have gone to hell. I wouldn't have gone to heaven either. I felt like I was sort of like in an in-between place, honestly. I don't know what would have happened to me after that. But I knew that it was like I was completely alone, not with God. Well, maybe that was hell. It wasn't fiery or anything, but it was just like complete absence, black, emptiness, complete loneliness, absolutely no love, you know, no presence of God. And I think that's where I would have gone, maybe if I had died at the time. So in conclusion, I would just say that, you know, if you have something like this in your past, I know for myself, like when I recovered, and I don't mean recovered as in like people who go to continuously 12-step meetings and it's like, oh, I'm in recovery and I could relapse anytime. Like, I feel like I just don't have a problem. I have no desire whatsoever to use drugs. I don't smoke weed. I might drink a little bit of alcohol now and then, like a little bit of wine. It does not do anything to me, like make me want to get wasted. I have zero desire to get intoxicated. Like, I hate it. I feel poisoned, you know. But you know, as somebody who recovered, thanks to God, from drug dependency in the past for a long time, even though I was a Christian, but I went around feeling like, I'm still this old person. Or like other people will look at me and they'll say, oh, she's a drug user. Not maybe because I kept telling them too. That would have something to do with it. But I felt like people kind of knew. And apparently this is really common with people who've had this problem, that they think that everybody's going to know, like it's written on your face. And that's not true. And I realized that, as the Bible says, that when you're in Christ, you're a new creation. And so I am a new creation. And that old me is just not me anymore. And when I walk around, people don't look at me and like, oh, you're a druggie or whatever. That was just maybe the devil, so to speak, getting a foothold on me and undermining my confidence in my own salvation and my own recreation. And I feel like this was a gift that God gave me. And this is actually why I don't go to any kind of meetings. Because it's like when God gives a gift, he gives it fully. I mean, he just took it away. And at one point, I have a friend who goes to meetings, and I went with him to a meeting. And when it came around, I didn't want to rock the boat. So I said, my name is Sonia, and I'm an addict. I felt wrong about it. And it's like, as soon as I said that, like my head started to spin. I felt almost like the room to shift. And I felt like I had opened a door to something bad, And for the next 2 weeks, every day I woke up and I felt like, I need a drink. And I would go into my liquor cabinet and have a shot of some kind of booze, which is very weird for me. And I started to feel like the desire to use. It's totally strange. Why? Well, I affirmed that I was an addict when actually God had healed me and I'm not an addict. And I think somehow by affirming that all the time, it's like, by affirming it, it's like you're making it more real. You're telling yourself, like, I'm an addict. I'm not an addict. And I have to affirm that. And that's not me being in denial. Like, that's me claiming the healing that God has given me. And when I went against that, it had an effect. It took like 2 weeks for me to get right again. I had to pray, I had to repent and say, I'm sorry, God, that I said that because it's not true and it denies what you did for me. So I don't go to any kind of meetings. I do go to church. I don't deny to myself that at one point this was a part of my life. But more importantly, I want to affirm what God has done for me. That I'm really a walking miracle. I mean, I was this girl with Asperger's, very miserable, very confused, like thinking that I was supposed to be a drug addict because somebody had told me that, doing drugs, almost killing myself with it. And it could have gone very badly. Like I could be not here talking to you, but by the grace of God, I am. Yet, I still remember, and I still have like a sense of humor about it, actually. Which I guess is the way that I deal with things, like with everything. Especially, sometimes things that are difficult in my life, not like in other people's lives, but in my life, I tend to cope through humor. And I guess this is where the whole like Anita character comes out. And in fact, although I don't really think about wanting to use drugs, but I still, I have this very like literal kind of thinking and sometimes like lacking common sense, which you see in Anita. And so, or sometimes the like, oh, well, it's because of their fault, like, I don't think that way, but I remember thinking that way, or sometimes I could see myself thinking that I could think that way, but I choose not to. And so whenever stuff like that comes up, I'm like, oh, that's one for Anita. I just write it down and it goes into an Anita video. So I guess in a way, Anita is maybe who I would have been if I hadn't given my life to Christ. And, I love Anita, God bless her, and she's a good person. I mean, she's not doing anyone any harm, she's just a bit lost. That's somehow something I feel like I need to do. It's just to express myself that way. And maybe this whole time I've sort of expressed that part of me through this cloaking of, using the Anita character. Which I don't want to stop doing, but you might notice Anita's been changing lately. So anyway, that's my story of, I guess, how God saved me from substance dependence, and how this relates also to Asperger's. And I hope this helps somebody. And wow, I know this was really long. But thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time.